On the 5th of January 2014, the Steve Irwin deployed its helicopter to search an area of the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary where we suspected the Japanese whaling fleet was illegally operating. Our main target was the Nisshin Maru, the factory vessel. Amongst the heavy pack ice, I spotted a bit of black next to a small iceberg. Camera at the ready, I fired off a shot and was able to confirm to our helicopter pilot Jerry that we had successfully found the Nisshin Maru. As we approached the last remaining factory whaling vessel in the world, I caught a glimpse of shades of black and grey, and suddenly realised the horrible truth, that the Nisshin Maru had 3 minke whales on its deck. Of the whales, 2 lay on their backs, their white chests exposed to the sky, blood pooling around them. The third lay flat on her stomach, her great weight pulling downwards, her face frowning, her eyes closed. As we circled around to the port side, the scene became even more horrific. The middle of the ship is where the whales are to be cut up, and in this spot, underneath and around the feet of 20 or so men, lay the remains and blood of a recently butchered whale. The red burst from the decks, shocking and grotesque. In the center lay a twisted and contorted mess of flesh. All around it, in every direction, were chunks of dark red flesh, strings of muscle, a large section of spinal cord, and even the unmistakable formation of the jawbone and head. A 4th minke whale had just been decimated here. And in the center, all that remained was an unidentifiable collection of muscle and tissue and bone, the last remains of the once beautiful and giant mammal that only hours earlier had been swimming free in the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary. The crew of the Nisshin Maru walked through this blood, stood on the bones of the whale, and from our height, moved around like ants on the carcass of a dead animal on the sidewalk. Each one carried either a large blade, a knife, a hook, or sometimes all of the above. I reminded myself that if I were to believe the government of Japan, then these were their scientists. All that I saw were butchers selecting their cuts of meat, separating the prime sections from the flesh that they deemed useless, which was pierced with hooks and dragged to the port side of the ship, to a conveyor belt, to be tossed back into the wild seas of the Antarctic, now flowing with blood. Low on fuel, we returned to the Steve Irwin as Sea Shepherd tightened the noose and moved in on the whaling fleet, ensuring that they had nowhere to run. Within 24 hours, we had successfully driven the whaling fleet out of the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary. The images and the footage that we collected on that day have exposed the brutal reality of Japanese whaling, which is nothing but an illegal whale meat operation. The world has seen these images and has become outraged. The whales need us now as much as they ever have, and hope that the death of these whales is not in vain, and that they can inspire something in you to help their brothers and sisters, who today swim free with their young in the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary, but tomorrow may face the explosive tip of the whaling fleet's harpoons.
Peter Hammerstedt. I am captain of the Bob Barker. This year was one of the longest, most dangerous campaigns that we have done to date. Not only did we face some of the roughest weather we've ever faced, that weather resulted in us losing our scout vessel, the Brigitte Bardot, very early on in the campaign. But we also faced an increasingly aggressive adversary, one that has shown as little regard for human life as cetacean life, and they showed that when they injured several crew members on board the Steve Irwin. I think what we saw this year was an increasingly desperate Japanese whaling industry. They showed as little regard for human life as they did for the laws of Australia. And what we saw this year was that the Japanese whaling fleet continuously entered the economic waters of Australia, the territorial sea limit of Australia. And it's one of the reasons it's so good to be back in Hobart is it was just a few months ago that off Macquarie Island we witnessed the harpoon vessel Yushin Maru No. 3 come as close as 4 nautical miles off the shore of Macquarie Island. Macquarie Island is a World Heritage Site. It's also under the governance of Tasmania. And it was thanks to the support and the determination of Senator Bob Brown and the Australian Greens that these killers were finally driven off the shores of Australia. Last year we bankrupted the Japanese whaling fleet. This year we once again succeeded in sinking them economically. We also delivered a major moral blow to the Japanese whaling industry. And the Japanese whaling industry just recently released that they killed 267 whales this season. That means that Sea Shepherd prevented the Japanese whaling industry from taking 75% of the quota. That's 768 whales saved, and that's a tremendous victory to us. Although this was one of the most dangerous campaigns we faced, we are absolutely 100% committed to continuing to intervene against the Japanese whaling fleet until peace is finally restored to the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary. For us, the word sanctuary actually means something. So no matter what the danger that we face, we are 100% committed to returning to the Southern Ocean. If the Japanese whaling fleet decides to return at the end of this year, we will return stronger, we'll return more effective than ever. I wouldn't be surprised if the Japanese whaling fleet stepped up their aggression towards us next year, but we are completely undeterred. For us, we need to enforce these laws. Nobody's enforcing the law against these whalers. When we found the Nishin Maru, the factory whaling ship of the Japanese fleet, we found them 65 nautical miles north of the Australian coastline. That's firmly within the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary, it's firmly within the Australian Antarctic Territory, and it's firmly within the Australian Economic Exclusion Zone. Nobody's enforcing the law against these guys, and if nobody will, then we'll take that upon ourselves. I think the reason that the Japanese whaling fleet called their season short this year is that they didn't want further confrontation with us. Once we found the Japanese factory whaling ship off the coast of Antarctica, we basically sealed the deal for them. I think they were also at an all-time low based on their morale, simply because thanks to the Australian Green Party and Senator Bob Brown, Australia wasn't going to budge on them entering Macquarie Island and trying some other foul tricks that they were attempting to try to stop us this year. Morale's been up and down. It's been hard being dogged continuously by Japanese security ships. This year, Japan allocated a $30 million security budget to the Japanese whaling fleet specifically to stop Sea Shepherd. This was money that was diverted from tsunami relief efforts. But despite all of this, despite the odds set against us, we were able to once again send the Japanese whaling fleet home early. We were able to save 768 whales from slaughter, and we've come out victorious.